He was my mirror image, my other half, the one person I trusted without question. Growing up, people couldn't tell us apart. We'd switch classes, prank our teachers, even trade places during exams. But somewhere along the way the game stopped being funny. Somewhere, my brother Liam stopped being my reflection and started being my rival. It began small. A lie here, a twisted truth there. He'd take credit for my ideas, my achievements, and I'd laugh it off, because that's what brothers do, right? We share everything. But one thing I never thought I'd share was my downfall. The day everything changed started like any other. I walked into my office, the company I'd built from nothing, to find two men waiting. Security. Their eyes were cold. "Mr. Harris, you need to come with us." My stomach dropped. Within hours, I was being accused of fraud, millions missing from the company accounts. My signature on the documents. My name on the transfers. My reputation, gone. I tried to explain, to show them it wasn't me. But every piece of evidence pointed straight to me. Even the surveillance footage, someone who looked exactly like me walking into the restricted area. Same suit. Same voice. Same face. Liam. I called him over and over. He didn't pick up. The moment I realized what he'd done, something inside me broke. Not just anger but disbelief. The kind that makes you question every memory you ever shared with someone. The court hearings dragged on for months. My friends disappeared, my investors backed out, and my parents, God, they couldn't even look me in the eye. "You two always fought," my mother said quietly once, "but I never thought it would come to this." And then one day I saw him. Walking out of a luxury car, smiling for cameras, wearing my watch. He'd used the chaos to take over everything. The company, the house, even my fiancée. He'd convinced everyone that he was the victim, that I had spiraled out of guilt and shame. For weeks, I lived like a ghost, silent, invisible, surviving off coffee and spite. And that's when the idea came. If Liam wanted to live my life so badly, I'd let him. Every inch of it. Every asset, every deal, every hidden trap I'd left behind, the ones he didn't even know existed. He thought he'd inherited everything. But what he really inherited was the end of his own game. I started by disappearing on purpose. No angry messages. No confrontations. I stopped defending myself online. I let the rumors breathe. People get bored of outrage when you don't feed it. While everyone thought I'd given up, I was laying out a map only I could read, 24 hours that would decide everything. First, I called my lawyer and told him I wanted to settle. "Let him have the company," I said, voice steady. "Transfer the remaining executive powers to Liam. Full access. Full responsibility." There was a pause on the line long enough to taste. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I'm done fighting," I answered. He warned me I'd lose everything. I told him that was the point. Behind that surrender were small things Liam would never notice. He didn't know the servers had a maintenance window every Friday night. He didn't know the private equity partner he was courting had a habit of calling me at 3 a.m. to test character. He didn't know the flagship product's regulatory renewal was due in less than a day, and missing it would freeze contracts automatically. All legal. All routine. All invisible unless you'd lived this company, not just worn it. I sent Liam a short message, "You win." No punctuation, no drama. Minutes later he replied, finally, "About time." He agreed to a formal signing, cameras, press, a victory lap. I insisted it happen immediately. He thought I was desperate. He didn't understand I was setting a clock. I visited my parents that evening. My mother opened the door like she'd aged 10 more years since the hearing. "I'm okay," I told her, and for the first time in months I meant it. My father asked if I wanted to fight. "No," I said. "I want him to live with what he's taken." At midnight, I walked alone through the empty lobby of the headquarters I'd designed. I ran my hand across the reception desk and felt nothing. Not grief. Not pride. Just clarity. By sunrise, Liam would have everything he wanted. And for the next 24 hours he'd finally learn what that actually meant. Dawn came soft and gray, and with it, a quiet I hadn't felt in months. The city smelled faintly of rain. I watched from a cafe 2 blocks away as Liam strode into the building wearing my old navy suit, chin high, a grin he practiced for cameras. He moved like a man who'd swallowed the world. He had no idea how small the stage truly was. Inside, I had left instructions with IT to run a routine health check at 7:55 and an automatic backup at 8. Harmless routines. Harmless to anyone who knew them. But when the legal renewal clock hit 9:01, contracts would lock and access would reroute. Nothing illegal, only the consequence of a missed update. I'd learned to think in deadlines. He thought in headlines. Liam began by making the rounds. He toasted with investors, shook hands, posed for a dozen photos and signed papers with a flair. Reporters whispered about redemption arcs and family healing. My inbox, now his, inundated with congratulations. Strangers sent messages praising him and condemning me. The irony tasted like ash. By 10, a client portal refused logins. Tech support called. Liam waved it off. He didn't see how small glitches become avalanches. He didn't understand that routine checks exist precisely to keep tiny errors from becoming disasters. He barked at engineers who could only say, "We're looking into it." At noon, the private equity partner pulled out. Their counsel cited missing compliance proof and looming regulatory paperwork. The partner backed away quietly, leaving contracts in limbo. Liam phoned me, breathless with anger, and for a heartbeat I almost told him the truth. Instead I said, "Do what you need to do." He barked orders at teams who had no map of the problems. Panic has a sound, and I listened to it swell like a siren through the building. The press smelled scandal where none existed yet. A board member texted, "Is this true?" I typed, "I don't know." It was the cruelest honesty. Watching him fumble, each forced smile and hurried call revealed how thin his victory was. He had inherited everything, titles, keys, cameras, but not the knowledge or time. He would learn before the day ended. By mid-afternoon the storm inside the building had grown louder. Staff were running from one floor to another, clutching folders and laptops. Liam tried to maintain his calm smile for the press still hanging around, but the cracks were showing. Every phone call seemed to end with his jaw tighter, his tone sharper. From my quiet spot in the cafe, I watched news alerts flicker on my phone. Harris Tech faces sudden suspension of contracts. The same anchors who had praised him that morning now spoke with hesitation, their voices carrying the smell of scandal. Liam always loved attention. He was finally getting more than he could handle. At 2 he called again. "What did you do?" His voice trembled under the surface. "You planned this, didn't you?" I let silence fill the line before replying softly, "You wanted everything. Now it's yours." He cursed and hung up. Within minutes, the board called an emergency meeting. I didn't need to be there. I knew exactly how it would unfold. He tried to bluff, blame the system, the former leadership, me. But with every word, the truth would edge closer. People notice fear even when it's disguised as anger. Around 4, my old lawyer sent me a one-line message, "They're panicking. You might want to see this." Attached was a photo from the conference room, Liam red-faced, sweating, surrounded by people who once called him brilliant. In front of him lay the compliance documents I'd quietly left in my drawer months ago, time-stamped, signed, untouched. Proof of everything he'd ignored. I leaned back, breathing slowly. The plan wasn't about money anymore. It was about reflection, about him seeing himself for what he'd become. As the sun began to dip, I walked to the old headquarters. The security guard who once greeted me every morning looked startled but nodded me in. I moved through the empty corridors, each echo a ghost of better days. I reached the glass doors of the main office. Through them I saw Liam, alone, defeated, staring at the dark screen in front of him. The empire he'd stolen had vanished in less than 24 hours. He didn't notice me at first. The lights inside the office were dim, a single desk lamp casting a harsh glow across his face. Papers were scattered, his tie undone, phone buzzing endlessly beside him. For the first time, Liam didn't look like my twin. He looked older, smaller, like the weight of his lies had finally found him. I stood silently at the door until he looked up. The moment our eyes met, the room went still. "You," he said, voice cracking between anger and exhaustion. "You did this." I stepped closer, calm, almost detached. "I didn't do anything you didn't ask for," I said. "You wanted my company, my title, my life. You just never learned how to carry it." He slammed his hand on the table. "You think this makes you better? You ruined everything." I smiled faintly. "No, Liam. You did that the second you framed me." He stood, breathing hard. "You think you're clever? You think letting me fail makes you the good guy?" I shrugged. "I don't need to be the good guy. I just needed you to see what success feels like without honesty holding it together." For a moment I thought he'd hit me. But instead he laughed, a sharp, broken sound that echoed off the glass walls. "You always thought you were smarter," he said bitterly. "But you forgot one thing. We're the same." I looked at him, really looked, and realized he was right in a way that hurt. We shared the same face, the same voice, the same hands capable of building or destroying. The only difference was choice. I walked toward the window overlooking the city. "You still have 12 hours left," I said quietly. "Everything's in your name." The company, the house, the accounts. You can try to fix it, or keep pretending. He glared at me, but the fire was gone. Why? He asked finally. Why not just destroy me completely? I turned to leave. Because I don't have to. You already did that yourself. Outside, the night air was cold and still. Behind me, I heard the sound of glass shattering, maybe a bottle, maybe a screen. But I didn't look back. Some endings don't need witnesses. The night stretched endlessly, quiet except for the city hum beneath a half-moon sky. I drove with no destination, the roads half empty, the air heavy with memory. Every streetlight reminded me of nights we spent sneaking out as kids, laughing over stolen sodas and dreams that felt identical. We used to talk about running a company together, about never letting success divide us. Somewhere between childhood promises and grown-up greed, that bond cracked, and now it was gone entirely. I stopped near the pier we used to visit when things felt too big to handle. The sea was black, the wind sharp, but it cleared my head. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Maybe revenge wasn't always about breaking someone. Maybe it was about reclaiming yourself from the wreckage they left behind. At 2 a.m., my phone vibrated again, a single message from Liam. No threats, no curses this time. Just 4 words, I can't fix it. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. He had the company, the headlines, the empire, all for 24 hours. And that, I realized, was enough punishment. By dawn, the story had broken. News outlets called it the fastest corporate collapse in tech history. Contracts void, investors fleeing, leadership questioned. Some claimed it was sabotage. Others whispered karma. My name started trending again, this time with a different tone. People remembered how careful I'd been, how transparent. Slowly, the truth was crawling out of the shadows Liam had cast. I turned off my phone and sat watching the sunrise melt across the water. Maybe people would forgive me. Maybe they wouldn't. But I didn't need their approval anymore. I'd spent too long trying to prove myself innocent in a world that believed lies louder than truth. As the light spread over the horizon, I whispered to no one, it's done. Somewhere across the city, Liam was probably staring at the same sunrise, only his came with the taste of defeat. And for the first time, I wasn't angry at him. Just done. Because revenge, when it's real, isn't loud. It's quiet. It's peace. The morning brought with it a strange calm. The air felt lighter, like the storm had passed, but deep down, I knew the final ripple was still coming. I made myself a cup of coffee, black and bitter, the way I used to drink it during the early startup days, and opened my laptop. My inbox was flooded again, but this time it wasn't hate. Journalists wanted statements, old partners wanted meetings, and people who had once ignored my calls were suddenly concerned. It was almost funny. Among the emails, one subject line stood out, board decision, urgent. I clicked it open. A short, formal message from the company's acting chair. They were suspending Liam indefinitely pending investigation. We would like to invite you for a discussion, it read. I stared at the words for a long moment. I had waited months to be heard, and now, when I didn't even care anymore, the door opened. Still I went. Not for them, for closure. When I walked into the same boardroom that had once voted me out, I felt no anger, no tension. Just familiarity. The air smelled of polished wood and expensive guilt. Liam sat at the end of the table, eyes hollow, hands clasped. He didn't look at me. The chairman cleared his throat. Mr. Harris, it seems there have been misunderstandings. Evidence shows the discrepancies originated after your removal. We deeply regret. I raised a hand. You don't need to finish. I'm not here for apologies. Liam finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. You planned this, didn't you? I looked at him steadily. No. I just let things be what they are. You built your empire on lies. I didn't have to destroy it, it collapsed under its own weight. Silence filled the room. I gathered my things and stood to leave. As I reached the door, I turned slightly and said, You wanted my life, Liam. Now you know what it costs. Outside, the world moved on, cars honking, people laughing, sunlight breaking through clouds. And for the first time, I felt like I could breathe again. The next morning, the media had turned the story into a wildfire. Every major network ran segments comparing our faces side by side, one labeled the accused, the other the heir. Now the labels had switched. The world loves a scandal, but it loves redemption even more. Still, I didn't feel triumphant. Walking past billboards that once bore my company's name, all I felt was distance, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. I went back to my apartment, one I'd rented quietly under a different name. The walls were bare, the kind of empty that gives you space to think. I sat by the window with a notepad and wrote a single word across the top. And I'd spent months trapped in a storm of accusation and anger. But as I looked out at the city I'd built my dreams in, I realized none of it mattered anymore. I didn't need to rebuild Harris Tech. I didn't even need to prove myself innocent to the world. I just needed peace. Around noon there was a knock at my door. I knew it was him before I opened it. Liam stood there, eyes bloodshot, hair a mess, his confidence stripped away. He looked nothing like the man who had stolen my life. More like the boy who used to run barefoot through summer fields with me. "I lost everything," he said quietly. I stepped aside, letting him in. He sank onto the couch, staring at his hands. "They're saying I might face charges." I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to shout, to tell him he deserved every sleepless night coming his way. But instead I said softly, "You didn't lose everything. You still have a chance to be honest." He looked up at me, tears forming, but I didn't feel pity, just finality. For once he had to live with the truth. He sat there for a long time, staring at the floor like it held answers. The same man who once stood over me in court, confident and cruel, now looked like a shadow of himself. His voice was small when he finally spoke. "I thought if I had everything you had, I'd finally matter." I leaned against the counter, watching him struggle with his own confession. "You always mattered, Liam," I said quietly. "You just couldn't stand that I worked for what I had." He shook his head. "You were always the favorite. The responsible one. Everyone compared me to you. I just wanted to prove I could be better." "By ruining me?" I asked, my tone calm but sharp enough to make him flinch. He didn't answer, and I realized it didn't matter anymore. Nothing he said could undo what had been done. Some wounds don't bleed. They just carve silence between people who once shared everything. After a while he stood up. "What happens now? That's up to you," I said. "You can keep pretending or you can tell the truth. Either way, I'm done fighting." He nodded slowly, then walked to the door. For a second I thought he'd say something, maybe an apology, maybe another excuse, but he just whispered, "I'm sorry," and left. I didn't chase after him. The door closed softly, and with it, the last echo of the life we once shared. I sat there for a while, letting the quiet settle. The city outside was waking up again, traffic, voices, laughter. Life moving on without knowing two brothers had just broken something sacred forever. I looked at the notepad again. Under the word "end," I wrote one more line. "Sometimes letting go is the loudest revenge." Then I closed it, exhaled slowly, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a victim or a hero. Just free. The days that followed felt strangely still, like time had loosened its grip. For the first time in years, my mornings weren't filled with panic or schedules or endless calls. I woke up to silence, brewed coffee, and watched sunlight stretch across the floor. It was an unfamiliar kind of peace, quiet but earned. The world, however, refused to stay quiet. Liam's downfall was everywhere. News reports dissected the company's collapse. Analysts debated whether greed or incompetence caused it. Online, people who once hated me now flooded the comment sections with sympathy. He was innocent all along. His brother betrayed him. Poetic justice. I didn't respond to any of it. Let them talk. Let them draw their conclusions. For once, I didn't need to defend myself. The truth had done that on its own. One evening, I received an email from an old investor, one of the few who had believed in me at the beginning. He wanted to meet. I hesitated, then agreed. We met at a small restaurant far from downtown, a place where no one cared about headlines. He smiled as soon as he saw me. "You look different," he said. "Lighter." "Maybe I finally slept," I replied. He chuckled, then leaned forward. "Listen, I know what happened was hell. But your name's clean again. People would back you in a heartbeat if you ever wanted to start something new." For a long moment I didn't answer. The idea of rebuilding was tempting, to prove I could rise again. But the truth was, I didn't want to chase that world anymore. Success had cost me too much. "I think I'm done building empires," I said finally. "I just want to build a life." He nodded slowly, with the kind of respect people give only to those who've seen enough pain to understand peace. When I stepped outside, the sky was painted in gold and violet. I walked home, hands in pockets, no rush, no noise, just me and the fading light. For the first time, I wasn't running from anything. I was walking toward something new. That night I couldn't sleep. The silence felt heavier than before, not empty but full of thoughts I'd ignored for too long. Revenge had always sounded powerful in theory, but living through it was different. It didn't give me the satisfaction I imagined. It gave me clarity, The kind that strips away everything fake and leaves only what's real. I thought about calling my parents. They'd stopped answering my calls when the accusations first hit, too afraid or too ashamed to pick sides. But they deserve to know the truth now. By morning I finally sent a message, "It's over. I'm okay." That was all. No anger, no explanation. Just peace. Later that day I walked past a park where kids were playing soccer. Their laughter carried across the wind, raw, careless, honest. I hadn't laughed like that in years. Maybe I'd forgotten how. I sat on a bench, watching them, and realized that somewhere between success and betrayal, I'd lost every simple joy that used to make life worth living. My phone buzzed again. A message from Liam, this time longer. I turned myself in. I couldn't live with it anymore. I told them everything. I read it twice, feeling an odd mix of sadness and relief. It wasn't victory. It was something quieter, closure. The following week, the news confirmed it. Liam had confessed to falsifying evidence, forging my signature, and embezzling company funds. Reporters called it the confession that shocked the tech world. I didn't feel pride. I just felt done. A few days later, I visited our old house, the one where we grew up. The paint was fading, the porch creaked under my shoes, but the memories were still alive there. I stood under the old oak tree where we'd carved our initials as kids. They were still visible, faint but unbroken. For the first time in a long while, I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I'd survived. A week later, I decided to leave the city. Not to escape, I'd already done that once, but to finally start fresh. I packed a single suitcase, a few clothes, my old notebooks, and a photo of us as kids, long before success or jealousy had turned us into strangers. I didn't know where I was heading exactly, just that it had to be somewhere quiet, somewhere without headlines or ghosts. The morning I left, rain fell softly, the kind that smells like new beginnings. I drove until the skyline disappeared in my rearview mirror. With every mile, the weight on my chest grew lighter. The noise, the cameras, the endless chase, it all faded into distance. For once, the silence felt kind. I found a small coastal town a few hours north, the kind where people still waved at strangers. I rented a modest house near the water, its porch overlooking the sea. The air smelled of salt and pine, and the nights were filled with the sound of waves instead of sirens. I started writing again. Not code, not reports, just words. Thoughts, memories, lessons. Sometimes I'd walk down to the docks at dawn, watching fishermen prepare their boats. One of them, an old man with weathered hands, once asked if I was from the city. I smiled faintly and said, "I used to be." That answer seemed enough. Days turned into weeks and slowly I felt like myself again. No longer Ethan Harris, CO, or the twin framed for fraud. Just a man learning how to live without the need to prove anything. One evening, while watching the sunset melt into the sea, I realized something I'd never understood before. Peace isn't given. It's earned, usually after you've lost everything that never truly mattered. I didn't know what the future held. Maybe I'd start another company someday. Maybe I wouldn't. But for now, the world could keep spinning without me. I had my freedom. And for the first time in years, that was enough. I drove through that little town until I reached a lookout point above the cliffs. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, restless but free, a mirror of everything I'd become. For years I'd chased control, over business, over people, over my own story. But standing there, I realized control was just another illusion. Peace wasn't in the winning, it was in the release. The locals had begun recognizing me by now, though no one asked for my story. They just smiled, waved, and went back to their routines. I liked that. They didn't care who I had been, they only cared who I was now. Just another man learning how to live quietly. Each evening, I'd walk along the shoreline, letting the waves crash around my ankles. Sometimes I'd imagine Liam walking beside me, not the man who betrayed me, but the boy who once built sandcastles and promised we'd rule the world together. I wondered if he ever thought about those days, or if guilt had buried them too deep to reach. One afternoon, a letter arrived, handwritten, no return address. I knew the writing immediately. It was from Liam. I hesitated before opening it, afraid of reopening wounds I'd finally let close. It was short. "I'm serving my time. Don't worry about me. I finally understand what you tried to teach me, that integrity isn't inherited, it's earned. I'm sorry not for losing but for forgetting who we were. Maybe someday we'll find peace as brothers again." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in my journal. There were no tears, just quiet acceptance. He was finally facing his truth, and I had already faced mine. That night, as the stars shimmered above the sea, I whispered into the wind, "I forgive you." It wasn't for him, it was for me. Because sometimes forgiveness isn't a gift you give, it's freedom you reclaim. Weeks turned into months and life began to feel normal again, not the kind of normal built on schedules or ambition but something simpler, softer. I learned to cook, to fix things around the house, to exist without needing an audience. The silence that once felt unbearable had become my favorite companion. Sometimes I'd drive into town to help at the community center. They were short on hands and I liked keeping busy. Fixing a broken chair or helping a kid with homework gave me a sense of purpose that no million-dollar deal ever had. People didn't know who I was and I didn't tell them. To them I was just Ethan, the quiet guy who always stayed after to lock up. That anonymity felt like healing. Every now and then my thoughts drifted back to Liam. The anger was gone, replaced by something gentler, a distant sadness for what we'd lost. I checked the news sometimes just to know he was still alive. Apparently he'd been working in a prison library helping other inmates learn to read. It sounded like redemption. Maybe he'd finally found something real too. One evening I was walking home from the docks when I passed a little boy playing with his dad. They were building a paper boat, laughing as it floated down a puddle. The boys' laughter echoed in the air, and suddenly I remembered us. Two barefoot twins, chasing paper boats down rain-soaked streets, shouting promises about who'd be faster, smarter, better. I smiled, not with regret but with understanding. We'd both been chasing something we didn't understand. I wanted success to mean peace. He wanted power to mean love. We were both wrong. That night, I lit a small candle by the window and said a quiet prayer. Not for revenge, not for closure, but for forgiveness for both of us. Outside, the ocean roared softly under the moonlight, and I realized the storm had finally passed, not out there but inside me. Spring arrived quietly in the little coastal town. The air smelled of salt and blooming jasmine, and the ocean shimmered with a kind of calm I hadn't seen in years. Each morning I walked the same worn path to the pier, coffee in hand, greeting fishermen by name. They didn't know my past, they only knew my presence, and somehow that felt like a second chance at life. I started writing more often. What began as short reflections soon turned into a full story, not about revenge but about truth. I wrote about betrayal, loss, and the strange grace that comes after pain. I didn't plan to publish it, I wrote it because it needed to leave my chest. Each page felt like an exhale. One morning as I was writing by the window, a letter arrived, this time from my parents. It was the first one in over a year. My hands shook as I opened it. The words were simple but heavy. We're proud of you. We're sorry for doubting you. Your brother wrote to us. He said you saved him in ways we never could. I sat there, the paper trembling between my fingers. For the first time since everything fell apart, tears came, quiet, unforced, real. I realized then that forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's something you keep choosing again and again until it stops hurting. That evening, I walked down to the shore with the letter in my hand. The sunset painted the waves in gold, and the wind carried the sound of distant laughter from the docks. I folded the letter neatly, placed it inside a glass bottle, and let the tide take it. Maybe someday it would reach somewhere far. Maybe it wouldn't. But that wasn't the point. The act of letting go was enough. As the bottle drifted away, I whispered, "We're free now. Not just me, all of us. The lies, the anger, the pain, all washed clean by the sea." Months later, I found myself standing on the same cliff where it had all begun, where I'd once stared at the ocean, angry at the world, lost in bitterness. But this time, everything felt different. The air was warm, the sky endless, and the water below shimmered like glass. I wasn't running from ghosts anymore. I was just living. I'd built a small life here, one that didn't depend on titles or validation. My days were simple. Writing, walking, helping the neighbors, and watching sunsets that reminded me that even endings can be beautiful. Sometimes when I looked out at the horizon, I wondered where Liam was now. The anger was long gone. What remained was quiet hope, that he'd found his own peace somewhere out there. One evening, while locking up the community center, I saw a boy holding his mother's hand, staring at the sky. "Mom," he said softly, "why do people fight if they love each other?" She smiled and replied, "Because sometimes, love hurts before it heals." Her words stayed with me all the way home. Maybe that's what life had been, a long, painful way of learning how to love again. Not others, not even family, but myself. When I reached my porch, I sat down and opened my journal one last time. On the final page I wrote, "My twin brother framed me. He stole my name, my life, and my peace. But I gave it all back, for 24 hours. And in that time I learned something he never did, that revenge isn't destroying someone else, it's rebuilding yourself without them." I closed the book, placed it on the table, and looked out at the sea. The waves rolled gently, whispering like old friends. The past no longer hurt. The future didn't scare me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't Ethan Harris, the betrayed twin. I was just Ethan, free, forgiven, and finally home. The wind carried the last light of day across the water, and I smiled, not at victory but at peace. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is healing.